How can you survive when the temperature inside your own home drops below zero and instead of warm floors under your feet, there is frozen ground? The first settlers on the frontier faced cold that penetrated not only through cracks in the walls, but also into their very souls, turning every night into a test of endurance. It was not just a struggle for comfort, but a daily battle to open their eyes again in the morning and continue their journey westward. Many believed that the main enemies of the pioneers were armed conflicts or wild animals. But in fact, the quiet night cold claimed many more lives. The history of the settlement of America is a story of the ingenuity of people who learned to use primitive means at hand to preserve precious heat. They turned straw, stones, and even snow into reliable tools for survival, creating heating systems where, it would seem, there was no help to be found. Watch the video to the end to find out how ordinary newspapers saved the lives of vagrants during the Great Depression and why a hole in the ground was sometimes cozier than a wooden house.
Is the stew ready, Ma?
What if I told you that everything you believed about the primitiveness of pioneer life was untrue, and that their beds were complex engineering structures? The first and most accessible barrier between the icy earthen floor and the human body was ordinary straw, which was harvested in huge quantities. The settlers quickly realized that sleeping on a pile of hay was ineffective, as it quickly clumped together and lost its insulating properties. Therefore, they created so-called mattresses, huge bags made of coarse fabric, tightly stuffed with dry stalks. The fabric for these purposes was chosen to be as dense as possible, often using teak, which did not allow the prickly stalks to escape and retain heat inside. Stuffing such a mattress was an art in itself, requiring knowledge of the properties of various plants and how they behaved under the weight of a person. Rye or wheat straw was most often used as it had a hollow tubular structure that retained air inside. It was this immobile air that created a thermal insulation layer, working on the principle of a modern camping mat or down jacket. The fresher and drier the straw was, the better it springed and the more effectively it reflected the cold coming from the frozen ground. However, over time the stalks broke, turning into dust, and the mattress became thin, hard, and cold. In southern regions and on plains where grain crops were rare, settlers found a surprising alternative in the form of corn husks. Corn husks, carefully dried in the sun, created a softer and more durable filling than ordinary grass. They did not crumble as quickly under the weight of the sleeper and made a characteristic rustling sound with every movement, which became a symbol of nighttime rest in that era. Such a mattress had excellent hygroscopic properties, absorbing moisture from the body and preventing hypothermia from dampness. One of the main problems with such organic bedding was the need for regular maintenance to maintain its volume. Every morning, the mattress had to be vigorously beaten to restore the air pockets between the straw stalks or leaves. If this was not done, the filling would compress into a dense pancake that provided virtually no protection from the cold coming from below. This morning routine was an essential part of daily life, on which the quality of sleep the following night depended. Once a year, usually after the harvest, the contents of the mattresses were completely replaced with fresh ones, and the old filling was burned. This was done not only for comfort, but also for hygiene, as dust and small debris accumulated in the old straw. The process of stuffing a new mattress was an important family event, marking the readiness of the house for the coming winter. A fresh, springy mattress, raised high above the floor, was considered a sign of good housekeeping and a guarantee of health. In addition, extra layers of insulation were often placed under the mattress itself if the floor was earthen. These could be old mats, woven rugs, or even just a thick layer of dry reeds spread directly on the ground. This multi-layered construction created the necessary distance from the source of cold, working like a layer cake. Every centimeter of height above the floor raised the air temperature around the sleeper by several degrees. Interestingly, in some regions, dried moss was used, which had even better thermal insulation properties than straw. Moss was collected in swamps, dried for a long time in attics, and used as a bottom layer in the coldest corners of the house. It acted like a sponge, trapping warm air, and did not rot as quickly as grass, making it a valuable resource. However, Harvesting it required much more time and effort, so moss remained a material for the select few or for the harshest winters. For those who traveled in wagons, straw mattresses were also a lifesaver, as they dampened the vibration from driving on rough roads. But at campsites, when the ground froze solid, straw alone was often not enough for a good night's sleep. Then combinations of straw with other materials, which we will discuss later, were used to create complex insulation systems. Pioneers learned to combine plant materials with fabric, creating prototypes of modern orthopedic and thermal insulation systems. It is important to note that the height of the bed played a critical role. The higher the mattress, the warmer the air. Therefore, bed frames were made as high as possible, leaving space underneath for storage, which created an additional buffer. Chests and boxes, tightly arranged under the bed, blocked drafts walking across the floor and protected the mattress from below. In cramped huts, this was the only way to make rational use of space and retain heat. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on these survival methods. What do you think about sleeping on corn husks? Write about it in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Are you ready to learn the truth about how one properly tanned hide could replace an entire stove and save you from certain death on the prairie? On the Great Plains, where trees were rare and the wind chilled you to the bone, bison hides became the main treasure of any family. These huge, heavy pieces of fabric, called robes, had unique properties that no woven blankets of the time could match. Bison wool was thick, curly, and incredibly warm, creating a powerful barrier against any frost. The secret to the effectiveness of bison hides lay in their thick skin and the special structure of the fur, which trapped warm air close to the body. Settlers and trappers quickly adopted the indigenous people's tactic of using these hides for sleeping in extreme conditions. One skin was often enough to survive the night outdoors, but more complex combinations were used in homes. The value of such a skin was so high that it was often used to pay for goods instead of money. A special technique involved using two skins at the same time, laid in a specific way for maximum insulation. The first skin was placed fur side up directly on straw or wooden flooring, creating a soft and warm base. The second skin was used as a heavy blanket, covering the sleeper with the fur inside, close to the body. This created a kind of cocoon inside which the human body temperature was maintained, even if the water in the bucket in the room froze. The weight of the bison skin played an important role. It pressed tightly against the edges of the bed, preventing cold air from penetrating inside. Unlike light blankets, which could become tangled or slip off during sleep, the heavy skin securely held the sleeper in place. This created an airtight effect, which was critically important in windswept huts. People often slept under such hides without clothes, as direct contact between the skin and the fur provided better warmth. In addition to bison, bear, wolf, and sheep skins were also used, but bison skins were considered the gold standard for winter gear. Sheepskins were often sewn together to create large blankets that were lighter than bison skins, but also very warm. Bear skins were valued for their water-repellent properties in long pile, but they were more difficult to obtain. Each skin underwent a long tanning process to make it soft and odorless. To enhance the effect, the skins were often combined with wool blankets, which were placed between layers of fur. This created additional air pockets and allowed the temperature to be regulated if it became too hot. The ability to properly fold a bed pie of skins and blankets was passed down from parents to children as an important survival skill. An incorrectly laid skin could slip and allow cold air to enter, which could lead to serious illness. Another important aspect was that the skins required care. They had to be regularly beaten to remove dust and dried in the cold. Moisture accumulating in the fur from breathing and body evaporation could freeze and turn the blanket into an icy shell. Therefore, during the day, the skins were hung outside, where the sun and wind removed excess moisture and refreshed the fur. This ritual was mandatory even on the coldest days to keep the bed dry. Nomads and hunters often used untreated skins as temporary bedding when they needed to quickly organize a place to sleep. These green skins were stiff and heavy, but they still protected against direct contact with the frozen ground. In homes, people tried to use only high-quality specimens that would last for decades. A good bison robe could be passed down and serve several generations. Over time, with the disappearance of bison, these unique natural blankets became a rarity and a luxury item. Settlers had to find replacements, switching to cotton blankets and industrial fabrics, which were often inferior to fur. But the memory of those times when a single skin saved the life of an entire family remained in the history of the frontier. This was a period when people used nature's gifts as efficiently as possible, having no alternatives. Do you think modern synthetic materials could compete with real bison hide in the harsh winters of the 19th century? What if I told you that I discovered by accident in old records that ordinary stones were used as advanced heating batteries? When the fire in the stove inevitably died down by morning, the only source of heat remaining was objects that could retain it for a long time and release it slowly. Settlers used large cobblestones, bricks, or special pieces of soapstone, which they heated on the stove or directly in the coals before going to bed. This method was a simple, inexpensive, and incredibly effective way to create a local zone of warmth right in bed. Soapstone, or talc chloride, was particularly valued for its unique heat capacity and ability to not crack when heated rapidly. Such stones could remain warm until morning, providing comfort even in the most severe frosts. They were prepared in advance, shaped into convenient bars or flat slabs, and kept as a valuable tool. If soapstone was not available, ordinary dense river stones or even cast iron irons were used. The process of preparing for bed included the mandatory ritual of heating and wrapping these hot water bottles. A hot stone could not be placed in bed just like that. It could set the straw on fire or burn your feet. Therefore, it was carefully wrapped in several layers of thick woolen fabric, flannel, or old towels. This not only ensured safety, but also slowed down the cooling of the stone, making the heat transfer more even and prolonged. Usually, such a hot bundle was placed at the feet, where blood circulation slows down first and where the cold begins to take hold of the body. The heat from the stones rose up under the blanket, creating a microclimate inside the bed. For many, this was the only way to warm their frozen feet after a whole day of working in the snow in poor footwear. Sometimes several stones were used, one at the feet, another in the lower back or back area. There were also special ceramic bottles for hot water, but they were rare and expensive on the frontier. Stone, on the other hand, was a free and eternal resource that could not leak and wet the bed, which made it more reliable than water. In addition, water cooled faster than a massive piece of heated granite or soapstone. In conditions of scarcity, stone became a sleeping person's best friend. In large families, heating stones became a conveyor belt. In the evening, the entire surface of the stove was covered with cobblestones. Each family member knew their stone and was responsible for heating it in time before going to bed. The loss or splitting of a beloved nightstone was perceived as an unfortunate nuisance that required an urgent search for a replacement. It was an item for individual use that people got used to. Sometimes such stones were also used to preheat the bed, moving them across the mattress before lying down. This allowed one to get rid of the unpleasant feeling of dampness and cold that enveloped a person lying down in an icy bed. After warming up, the stone was returned to the feet, and the person sank into the already prepared warmth. This little trick significantly accelerated falling asleep and improved the quality of sleep. Interestingly, this method was used not only at home, but also when traveling, if it was possible to build a good fire. The stones were heated in the fire, then buried under the sleeping place, or placed next to the person, wrapped in a piece of skin. This allowed trappers and travelers to survive on the frozen ground without tents or stoves. The stone continued to work even when the fire had long gone out. Over time, rubber hot water bottles replaced stones, but many old-timers on the frontier continued to use the tried and tested cobblestones. They believed that the dry heat from the stone was better for joints and bones than the heat from water. This tradition persisted in remote areas until the mid-20th century. Simple heat capacity physics saved people from frostbite and chronic colds. Don't forget to like this if you are amazed by the ingenuity of people in the past. Want to know the secret that allowed people to wake up alive in a house without central heating when a blizzard was raging outside? The stove was the heart of the home, but simply throwing wood into it was not enough to keep the heat going throughout the long winter night. The art of banking the fire was a critical skill that every adult settler possessed. The trick was to make the fuel smolder slowly, giving off heat for hours, rather than burning brightly for 30 minutes. Before going to bed, the largest and densest logs, often from hardwood such as oak or hickory, were loaded into the stove. These logs were not allowed to burn openly. They were covered with a layer of ash or coal to limit oxygen access. This slowed down the burning process, turning the wood into slowly smoldering coals that radiated even heat. The ability to correctly select the amount of ash and the position of the damper came with years of experience and mistakes. A mistake in this process could be very costly. If the damper was closed too early, one could suffocate from carbon monoxide. If too much air was left in, the wood would burn out quickly, and by 3 o'clock in the morning, the house would cool down to the outside temperature. The balance between safety and warmth was a fine line that we walked every night. People woke up from the cold if the fire went out, and this often saved them from freezing. Cast iron stoves, popular at the time, heated up quickly but cooled down just as quickly, lacking the heat capacity of brickwork. Therefore, additional screens made of stones or bricks were often built around the stove to accumulate heat during the day. At night, these heat accumulators continued to give off heat, smoothing out the sharp temperature drop after the wood burned out. It was a simple modernization that significantly increased the efficiency of heating. In the poorest huts where there was only an open hearth, the task was even more difficult, as most of the heat escaped through the chimney. There they used a night log, a huge piece of wood that was placed deep in the hearth so that it would smolder until morning. In the morning, the remains of this log were broken up, the coals were fanned, and used to quickly light a new fire. Keeping the fire going was a sacred duty, as matches were expensive and in short supply. The location of the beds in the house was also dictated by the stove. People always slept with their feet toward the heat source. The weakest members of the family, the elderly and the sick, were given places closer to the fire, in the zone of maximum comfort. The rest had to settle for the periphery, compensating for the cold with extra blankets and clothing. The thermal zoning of the room was clear and not subject to discussion. Sometimes, on particularly windy nights, the heat was blown out of the house faster than the stove could produce it, and then someone had to stand guard. Family members took turns getting up to throw wood on the fire and check the damper, preventing the fire from going out completely. This intermittent sleep was the norm in winter life, the price to pay for relative warmth and safety. The person responsible for the stove held the lives of all the inhabitants of the house in their hands. In addition, the stove was used to heat the bricks and stones we mentioned earlier, turning it into a multifunctional center. Shoes and clothes were also dried on it so that warm clothes could be worn in the morning, which also helped to keep the body warm. Damp clothes were the enemy, and the stove helped to combat them every night. The morning began not with coffee, but with checking the coals and reviving the flame. Do you think you could handle the task of keeping the fire going in such conditions with only a primitive stove? Dugouts and sod houses, known as soddies, were the settlers' ingenious response to the lack of timber on the Great Plains. These dwellings, half or completely buried in the ground, used the geothermal properties of the soil to protect against extreme temperatures. The earth is an excellent insulator, and below the frost line, the temperature remains consistently above freezing throughout the year. In winter, the walls of such a house did not freeze through like the thin boards of frame buildings, keeping precious heat inside. The walls, made of layers of sod, were up to a meter thick, creating a powerful barrier against the icy winds of the prairie. The sod, intertwined with grass roots, worked like modern insulation, preventing rapid heat loss. Inside such a dugout, it was damp and dark, but the temperature rarely dropped to critical sub-zero levels, even when it was -40 outside. This passive heat retention saved fuel, which was in desperately short supply on the plains. The floor in such houses was most often earthen, compacted to the hardness of concrete, and it also played a role in thermoregulation. Although it was cold to the touch, it was never icy like boards blown by the wind from below. The settlers covered it with straw, skins, and woven mats, creating acceptable living conditions. The main advantage was the absence of drafts from below, which were the scourge of houses raised above the ground. The windows in the dugouts were made small and placed low or on the south side to catch maximum solar heat. At night, they were covered with thick blankets or skins, turning the house into an airtight capsule. The massive earthen walls accumulated heat from the stove and people's breath, slowly giving it back when the fire died down. The inertia of such a house was enormous. It took a long time to heat up, but it also cooled down very slowly. However, life in a dugout had its significant drawbacks, the main ones being constant dampness and earth falling from the ceiling. To protect the beds from dirt, sheets of fabric or muslin were stretched over them, creating a kind of canopy. This also created an additional microclimate above the bed, keeping warm air in the sleeping area. The struggle for warmth went hand in hand with the struggle for cleanliness. In some cases, especially in hilly areas, houses were literally carved into the hillside, leaving only the facade exposed. This provided maximum protection from the winds on three sides and utilized the thermal mass of the hill. Such dugouts were the warmest housing options available to the poor. They resembled burrows, but it was this primitive design that saved thousands of lives in the treeless wastelands. Building a sod house cost next to nothing, but it required hellish physical labor to cut and lay tons of earth. Nevertheless, for many families, it was their only chance to survive their first winter in a new place. Over time, as people became wealthier, they built wooden houses, but they often remembered that it was warmer in the sod houses in winter. Wooden frame houses without good insulation were drafty and required much more firewood. Even when the opportunity arose to build a normal house, many used the dugout as a winter bedroom or kitchen. The principle of using the heat capacity of the earth was intuitively understood by people living in harmony with nature. It was survival architecture, where aesthetics gave way to functionality and physics. The earth was not just a foundation, it was the walls, the roof, and the insulation. Sod houses became a symbol of perseverance and willingness to use any resources for survival. They proved that even in the complete absence of building materials, it was possible to create a warm shelter. Are you ready for the shocking truth that the weight of your blanket was more important than its thickness? Quilts were not just beautiful handicrafts, but a vital tool for thermoregulation. In the harsh conditions of the frontier, where houses were exposed to all winds, a light and fluffy blanket was practically useless. Heavy, dense, and multi-layered products were valued here, as their weight literally pressed the sleeper down onto the mattress. This created reliable insulation and prevented precious heat from escaping into the freezing room. The main task of such heavy textiles was to eliminate any air pockets around the body, even the smallest ones. If the blanket did not lie tightly, every time the sleeper turned, frosty air penetrated under it, instantly cooling the bed. The heavy blanket worked like a flexible cover that hugged the contours of the body and sealed the heat inside. Its weight ensured that even in sleep, the person remained in an airtight cocoon. A wide variety of materials that were at hand were used as filling for such monumental blankets. Most often, carded sheep's wool was used inside, which retained heat perfectly. If there was not enough wool, old, worn-out clothes, small scraps of fabric, or even coarse raw cotton were used. Each layer added the necessary weight and density to the product. Sugan had another important property that was valued in the field. Thanks to its density and the natural grease in the wool, it was an excellent water repellent. Such a blanket served faithfully in the harshest conditions, replacing a tent or raincoat. Sugan was often used in homes as an upper protective layer, laid on top of softer homemade quilts. The famous patchwork quilting did not arise out of a love of art, but out of the harsh necessity to utilize every scrap of fabric. Textiles in those days were very expensive and scarce commodities that could not be thrown away. Old wool coats, worn-out trousers, and out-of-fashion clothes were given a second life. All of this was cut up and turned into thick squares for new warm blankets. The numerous seams connecting the patches added the necessary stiffness and density to the product. Each seam slightly compacted the fabric structure, reducing its wind permeability. Thus, old things continued to serve people in a new form, protecting their sleep. In this way, the family's history was literally sewn into what kept them warm at night. On a particularly cold night, there could be as many as 10 layers on the bed, turning it into a layer cake. It all started with a sheet and ended with heavy homespun blankets, which were thrown on top of each other. People slept under a veritable mountain of textiles, creating a complex, multi-layered system of insulation from the outside environment. Air was trapped between these layers, creating additional thermal barriers. The housewives often put the thickest and sometimes the dirtiest blanket they had on top. Its purpose was purely utilitarian, to protect the lower, cleaner layers from dust, soot, and smoke from the stove. In cramped huts with open fires, dirt settled constantly, and the top blanket took the brunt of it. This made it possible to wash the main bedding less often, which was an extremely laborious task in winter. Every morning, this mountain of textiles had to be taken apart and thoroughly dried by the fire or in the wind. During the night, moisture from breathing and body evaporation inevitably accumulated inside the layers. If the bed was not dried, the moisture could freeze or lead to mold, making sleep cold and dangerous. Bed care was a daily ritual on which the comfort of the next night depended. For extra warmth and comfort, special flannel sheets with a nap were used. They were much more pleasant to the body and felt warmer than smooth, cold cotton or rough linen. Flannel had the property of warming up very quickly from the heat of the human body without taking away precious energy. This eliminated the painful shock of touching ice-cold fabric in an unheated bedroom. In the poorest families who could not afford to buy flannel, other solutions were sought. Instead of sheets, sacks of flour or grain sewn together were often used. The coarse fabric of these sacks also retained heat well and was stronger than thin calico. Any fabric was used in the endless war against the cold, and aesthetics took a back seat. Women spent countless long evenings painstakingly stitching quilts by candlelight or torchlight. This was not just a female pastime or hobby, but serious preparation for the family's winter survival. The quality of the stitches directly determined the durability and thermal properties of the finished quilt. The more frequent and finer the stitching, the more securely the filling was fixed inside. Frequent stitching prevented wool or cotton from clumping after washing or prolonged use. If the filling clumped together, empty cold areas formed in the quilt, which was unacceptable. Therefore, a good, tightly quilted quilt was a real investment of time and hard manual labor. These efforts paid off every cold night when the family slept warmly. Without a solid supply of such reliable quilts, wintering in a poorly heated house would have been doomed to failure. Sometimes the quilts were also hung on the walls around the bed or used as thick canopies. This allowed the creation of a kind of room within a room, separating the sleeping area from the rest of the cold space. Such a canopy significantly reduced the volume of air that needed to be heated by body heat. In this case, the bed turned into a small insulated capsule inside an icy house. The fabric worked everywhere, above the sleeper, below them, and in a thick ring around them. It was a soft but reliable fort protecting a person from the harsh reality of a frozen dwelling. Could you fall asleep under the weight of 5 or 6 heavy wool blankets that restricted your movements? For vagrants, hobos, and the poorest migrants who had neither skins nor woolen blankets, paper became a lifesaver. This disposable material, which city dwellers considered trash, became a valuable resource for survival for the homeless. Ordinary old newspapers, folded into several thick layers, had amazing thermal insulation properties. The secret lay in the structure of the material and its ability to create a barrier against the cold. Paper is excellent at trapping still air between its layers, working on the principle of modern building insulation. Air is a poor conductor of heat, and the more air pockets there are, the warmer a person will be. This method, widely known as the hobo blanket, saved thousands of lives in the most difficult times. This was especially true during the Great Depression and on cold nights on the windy railroad. Newspapers were placed directly under outer clothing, wrapped around the torso or legs. They were stuffed into shoes if they were holey or too thin for winter weather. Paper was also stuffed into sleeves, creating an additional windproof and insulating layer around the limbs. This created a layered effect that was accessible even to those who could not afford a sweater. Unlike loose knit fabric, thick paper was completely windproof. This property was critical when forced to spend the night outdoors or in drafty freight cars. Fabric allowed icy gusts to reach the body, while newspaper acted as a windbreaker, reflecting the flow of cold air. Slightly crumpled paper created the necessary volume and air pockets that effectively retained the heat coming from the body. In the homes of the poor, old newspapers were often used to cover the wooden walls from the inside in several layers. This was done not only for beauty or to create comfort, but also to simply seal the cracks. A layer of thick paper and dense paste reliably blocked micro drafts that blew heat out of the hut. This made the room a little more airtight and therefore warmer in winter. This was perhaps the cheapest form of repair and insulation available to absolutely everyone. The walls became less permeable to wind, creating a thermos effect inside the room. In addition, reading old news directly from the walls was an additional entertainment on long winter evenings. It replaced wallpaper, insulation, and a library all at once. Cardboard, if it could be found in the trash outside shops or warehouses, was even more prized among vagrants than newspapers. It was much stronger, thicker, and held its shape better than soft newsprint. Cardboard boxes were taken apart into sheets and laid on the floor under the main bedding. This created an excellent thick barrier against the cold coming from the ground or concrete. A simple cardboard box could become a temporary shelter, a kind of small house. The walls of the box reflected the heat radiated by the body back to the sleeper, creating a warmer microclimate inside. In a world where a person had nothing, ordinary city trash became an invaluable resource for survival. The ability to find and use a piece of cardboard could be a matter of life and death. This unique experience of using paper was passed on by word of mouth among those who found themselves on the margins of society. Experienced vagabonds taught newcomers how to survive with waste paper. Knowing how to crumple a newspaper correctly so that it would keep you warm rather than just lying flat was part of the important science of the road. You had to create volume without tearing the paper, and that required a certain skill. People learned to see the potential for thermal insulation in the most unexpected and simple things. An ordinary newspaper ceased to be a source of information and became a source of heat. The simplicity and primitiveness of this method did not detract from its high effectiveness in critical situations. It worked, and that was enough to save lives. Even with normal clothing, many workers and travelers would place rolled-up newspapers under their jackets on windy days. This created a windproof shield that protected the lungs from hypothermia and inflammation. This method helped keep the core of the body warm, preventing the internal organs from freezing. It was a simple way to turn a light jacket into serious protection from the elements. The paper was disposable and quickly became unusable, but that was not a problem. Supplies could be easily and freely replenished in any city, town, or station. It was an ideal strategy for mobility and quick adaptation to changing conditions. There was no need to carry heavy bundles. Insulation could always be found on site. The use of waste paper for warmth is a striking example of how extreme necessity forces people to rethink the properties of familiar objects. In the desperate struggle against the cold, there was no room for squeamishness or aesthetic preferences. No one thought about how it looked from the outside. Only the result mattered. If it worked and saved lives, it was used without hesitation. Mountain hunters and trappers who spent months away from civilization had mastered the art of sleeping on snow. Their main secret was the use of pine branches laid in a special way. A thick layer of spruce or fir branches, laid tile-like with the cuts facing down, created a springy and warm mattress. This layer separated the sleeper from the snow and ice, providing ventilation and insulation at the same time. The pine branches not only provided warmth, but also gave off a pleasant aroma and protected against moisture that could rise from the snow melting under the body. The height of such a bedding could reach half a meter if the camp was planned for several days. The more effort the trapper put into gathering branches, the more comfortable his night would be. A waterproof cloth or skin was laid on top of the pine branches to complete the structure. Another important piece of equipment was a rubberized blanket or piece of tarpaulin, often of military design. This waterproof layer was laid on the ground or snow first to prevent moisture from soaking the bed from below. Combined with a wool blanket, this provided reliable protection from the outside environment. The ability to combine natural materials with industrial products was the key to survival in the mountains. Trappers often slept in so-called snow caves or hollows dug into snowdrifts. Snow, like Earth, is an excellent insulator, and the temperature inside a snowdrift is always higher than outside in the wind. The entrance to such a shelter was made below the sleeping area so that cold air would flow down and warm air would remain at the top. This required knowledge of physics and caution so that the vault would not collapse. Clothes were not taken off at night, but only loosened so as not to interfere with blood circulation. Moccasins and fur hats remained on the hunter, as the head and feet lost heat the fastest. Dried grass was often stuffed into moccasins for extra warmth. Dry feet ensured that a person would be able to get up in the morning and go check the traps. The fire was built in a special way. A long fire, nodya, made of 2 or 3 logs burned all night, providing even heat along the entire body of the sleeper. A reflective wall of branches or stones behind the sleeper directed the heat of the fire toward the person, preventing it from dissipating. The trapper slept between the fire and the reflector, turning as necessary. These people lived in conditions where any mistake led to death, so their methods were honed to perfection. They did not fight nature, but used its features to their advantage. Pine needles, snow, and wood were their building materials and bedding. Their experience formed the basis of modern survival techniques used by special forces and tourists. In the Southwest, in the lands of the Apache and Pueblo, the approach to heat conservation was different, based on the use of adobe and adobe. The clay walls of the houses had phenomenal thermal inertia. They accumulated the heat of the sun during the day and slowly released it at night. The temperature in such houses was much more stable than in wooden buildings or tents. The floors in traditional dwellings were often sunken or made of compacted clay, which also retained heat. Some tribes used a floor heating system, laying channels for smoke from the hearth under the sleeping areas. The warm smoke, passing through these channels before exiting, heated the ground on which people slept. It was an ancient analog of underfloor heating, incredibly effective and economical. The sleeper received heat directly from below, which allowed them to get by with a minimum of blankets. Woven mats made of yucca or grass served as insulators, which were laid on the clay floor. They were stiff but provided excellent protection from dust and created an air gap. Multi-layered constructions of mats and skins were often used to achieve maximum comfort. These materials were readily available in the desert and could be easily replaced as they wore out. Sleeping places were often arranged on raised platforms, clay couches built into the walls of the house. This raised the person above the coldest layer of air near the floor and brought them closer to the heat emanating from the walls. Such couches were often covered with skins and fabrics, creating cozy niches. During the day, they served as seats, and at night they turned into beds. The entrance to the dwelling was often covered with thick skins or blankets to prevent heat from escaping. Narrow and low doorways minimized the loss of warm air when entering and exiting. The entire architecture was subordinated to the idea of conserving energy in conditions where firewood was scarce. Adapting to daily temperature fluctuations in the desert required flexibility. The house had to be cool during the day and warm at night. Clay was ideal for this task, acting as a natural climate control system. Settlers who came to these lands quickly adopted local building traditions, understanding their advantage over frame houses. The last but not least important line of defense was the physical elimination of any ways for cold air to penetrate. Fabric snakes filled with sand or sawdust were placed under doors and on windowsills to block gaps. These heavy rolls fit snugly against the floor, preventing icy drafts from creeping up your legs. It was a simple solution that significantly increased comfort in the home. Outside, houses were often covered with straw, snow, or earth up to window level, creating a so-called barricade. This outer layer of insulation protected the subfloor and lower part of the walls from freezing. Snow, being an excellent insulator, worked to the benefit of humans if used correctly. Such a snow coat could raise the temperature in the house by several degrees. Inside the room, carpets, blankets, or even old clothes were hung on the walls to create an additional layer of insulation. Bare walls quickly sucked out the heat, while textiles retained it inside the room. The more fabric there was on the walls and floor, the warmer the house felt. This created visual comfort and a real thermal effect. Beds were often equipped with thick fabric canopies that were closed at night, creating an enclosed space. Inside such a canopy, the temperature quickly rose from the warmth of breath and body heat. This was especially important in large rooms that were impossible to heat entirely. The canopy was a small fortress of warmth in an ocean of cold. In the morning, the struggle began anew. It was necessary to open the shutters, check the damper, shake out the snakes, and prepare for the next night. Life on the frontier was a cycle of heat conservation and production. There were no trifles in this matter. Every crack could cause a cold. Attention to details such as plugging gaps with moss or clay was a constant occupation. The house was a living organism that required constant care and treatment for drafts. People learned to feel the movement of air on their skin and react immediately to any threat of cold. This constant vigilance and ingenuity allowed generations of people to survive and master the harsh lands of the West. Their experience reminds us that comfort is not a given, but the result of hard work and knowledge. We have seen that survival in the icy homes of the frontier was not a matter of luck, but the result of a whole complex of ingenious solutions and hard work. From straw mattresses to heated stones, from bison hides to earthen walls, every element of daily life worked to preserve precious heat. These people did not have modern technology, but they had a deep understanding of physics and nature, which allowed them to turn a hostile environment into a home. Their experience teaches us to appreciate simple things and reminds us of the incredible adaptability of humans. Which of these methods did you find most surprising or ingenious? Write in the comments what topics about life in the past you would like to see in future videos. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue your journey into history with us.